Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. I am honored by the opportunity I am afforded to open this community dialogue today. As we know, recently, Arts and Culture Minister Nathi Mthethwa has announced a number of name changes in the Eastern Cape, including the city of Port Elizabeth, which will now be known as Gqeberha. Former Port Elizabeth International Airport now will be known as Chief Dawid Stuurman International Airport. And lastly, Uitenhage, where I am based, is now renamed as Kariega. In his statement on the 25th of February this year, the minister said that the transformation of the naming landscape in South Africa is a critical component of the heritage landscape as a whole. And then he then said that prior to the changes, the Provincial Geographical Names Committee conducted public consultations on all the names that were changed. However, for example, the mayor of Nelson Mandela Bay, Ubaba Unqaba Banga, amongst many others, has criticized the Ministry of Arts and Culture over the renaming of Port Elizabeth and Uitenhage in the Eastern Cape. Banga said that the processes were fatally flawed and devoid of inclusivity. He said that it was imperative that the processes followed in name changes be inclusive and reflect the constitutional commitments to reconciliation. Furthermore, he said he was not personally opposed to name changes, but was only heeding a call made by the residents. Against this background, ladies and gentlemen, today's dialogue, the Herald and the Nelson Mandela University, coordinated by CANRAD, aims to open a platform of engagement on these opposing views and to create an opportunity for the citizens to express their views on the name changes process in South Africa. In this regard, we invited different stakeholders, including the South African Geographical Names Council, the activists, heritage practitioners, and business people. On that note, on behalf of the Herald and the Nelson Mandela University, I wish to welcome all the invited speakers today, all the citizens who are watching virtually, and the entire community of practice pertaining name change in South Africa. Nonke mawethu namkelekile, enkosi. And then I would like to hand over now to a colleague of mine who will be facilitating today's discussion, Prof. Christi van der Westhuizen, who is an associate professor and head of research at the Center for the Advancement of Non-Racialism and Democracy at Nelson Mandela University. Prof. van der Westhuizen is a political commentator and media columnist and the author of several books, including White Power and the Rise and Fall of the National Party. Over to you, Prof. Christi van der Westhuizen.
Thank you so much, Sombabu. Welcome to everybody. Very good to be joining you today to talk about this very important conversation. We at Nelson Mandela University was going to host a conversation on name changes about a year ago, and then the pandemic struck. And in the meantime, certain steps, in a sense, overtook us. And we're actually very happy that we can now gather with you and with our speakers today to discuss the name changes that have actually been effected in the meantime. So just to say a few words to frame our conversation, as we know, history is very important, and but also very contested. We are living in a very divided country, which is a legacy of colonialism and apartheid. We have a situation where significant sections of our population, particularly indigenous people and those people who descended from slaves, have had their histories suppressed, have had their memories cut out of the national memory, one could say. Particularly during the periods of colonialism and apartheid, the experiences of people who were not who outside of the white settler population were being actively suppressed, along with many other violences, as we know, that went with colonialism and apartheid. So restoring names is actually about restoring excluded and repressed memories. It's about retrieving heritages. And it's very much also about, as we know, memory is not just about the past, it's about identity in this very moment. And how do we constitute our identities now? So if we want to constitute an inclusive nation, a nation coming together, we need to be re-remembering all of our histories and draw them together. That's about re-remembering the past, having it restored in the present. And it's also about re-remembering ways of doing, ways of being, ways of thinking. So there's a bigger project also about knowledges, all those excluded knowledges, bring them back in. And also re-remembering what we are proud of, the resilience, the fortitude, the courage, also particularly in the anti-colonial and anti-apartheid struggles that have gone before. In this regard, I'm particularly thinking of Dawid Stuurman, for example, who the airport is now named after. This is he was the leader of one of the last resistances against the settlers. He was caught. He was one of the first, not one of the first, but he was one of those 18th century prisoners on Robben Island. He actually managed to escape from Robben Island. Then he was re-caught and banished to Australia, where he died, and never to see his homeland again. And his remains are in unmarked grave, so we can't even bring back his remains and restore them properly. We also have Uitenhage, which is now going to be called Kariega. And just to give us a bit of a sense of where these colonial names come from, particularly Uitenhage was the name of the Batavian Dutch Commissioner General that was ruling in that short Dutch occupation between 1803 and 1806. His name was Jacob de Mist, and he had a daughter whose name was Augusta Uitenhage de Mist. So that's where Uitenhage comes from. Quite obscure. Then we have if we think about the name of Port Elizabeth, many people think it's got to do with the current Queen of Britain. In fact, it doesn't. It was the name of a woman called Elizabeth Donkin. She happened to be the wife of the acting governor, Ruffin Donkin of Britain at the time, and he happened to receive the British settlers in Algoa Bay in 1820. And he decided to rename the tiny settlement at that stage to name it after his wife, who had died in India. So she had never set foot actually on the African continent. So if we look at the new name, Gqeberha, which is the name of what the Balkans River has always been called, but it's also similar to the name of the township next to Warmer, which is a township that's been in existence since the 1920s, where we had people seeking jobs, settling there in a bid to find work. And it's been subjected to repeated threats of relocation, forced removal over the decades during apartheid and before that during segregation. So I think that therefore, from my point of view, there is a certain justice in making this community that was so repeatedly threatened with exclusion from the city to take the name of that community and make it the name of the city. But this is what we will be discussing today. I'm very excited to introduce to you our speakers. And we've got quite a tight time schedule. What I will do is I will lead us through the conversation. Each of our speakers has got 10 minutes. And we are kicking off with Mr. Khensani Maluleke, which we are very happy to have us join today. He runs the Khensani Heritage Consulting Company. He's had over 23 years of heritage management experience, both in the private and public sector in South Africa. He has served in a number of heritage councils and committees. He's the former chairperson of the Gauteng Provincial Name Change Committee, and he's the current national chairperson of the South African Geographical Names Council. So I'm going to hand over immediately without much ado to Khensani. Khensani, if you can take 10 minutes and then we'll move on to our next speaker. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Christi, Program Director, fellow panelists, colleagues, program conveners, ladies and gentlemen. Let me take this opportunity to thank Herald and the Nelson Mandela University for having extended this, this invitation. In our view, it's really long overdue, I think, given how we have been communicating as agency to different publics. I am going to give some kind of a disclaimer to say that I am going to be limited in my responses for a simple reason that the names that have been gazetted recently, they have been in terms of the Act, there is provision for an appeal process, and that process was concluded on the 23rd of March, where all the submissions were made. So I'm really not privy to what have been submitted, and as a result, I'm not going to respond to anything that relates to that process, lest I jeopardize the appeal process. I'm also thankful to Professor Christi for having given that elaborate context or background in terms of what she has mentioned, to say that history is contested, which I agree, that memories have been cut out due to colonialism. I think that's a fact. And that there is the need to restore names, and the view is to really retrieve heritage. And the issue of identities, I think, has come out clearly, particularly post 94, to say who are we as a nation. And I think if you look at the importance of names, in my view, they carry three important elements. And I think one, they have to do with values, which they convey. They also have to do with meaning, which in my view is important. And the third one has to do with symbolism, the kind of symbols that we need to have. So that, in my view, I think it's the importance of why we have names. Coming to SAGNC, if you look at our mandate is threefold, in the sense that we are supposed to redress the imbalances. We are supposed to correct whatever has not been correct. We also have to transform the geographical naming landscape, which has not been done adequately. Maybe just to share a quick background. The SAGNC was established in 1998 as an advisory council to the minister. And to date, the council has not done more than 2,000 names, meaning that the names that we have are really under 2,000, which in the 27 years of democracy, this is really not a great justice, or one can term that a serious injustice. And I think if you look at countries like Zimbabwe, it has taken them just 2 years to undertake this naming process. And the reason why it has taken them 2 years, it's for a simple reason that there was no consultation. So our constitution affords us the opportunity to consult with the general public. And of the 2,000, of the less than 2,000 names that we have, a lot of them were around corrections and registration of settlements. And with regards to having new names, we really haven't done much, which I think it's something that we need to really accelerate, given the fact that 27 years, it's a long period of time. But I think there are challenges to that effect. And an interesting question in terms of giving context is, what are geographical names? And in the handbook that we share with the South African public, we say that these are names of features that are natural or man-made and adapted. And if you look at the role of the S agency, as I have articulated earlier on, that is that of advising the minister. If you look at the object of the Act, they are important because they define the mandate of what council needs to do. And I'm going to mention just a few in the interest of time. One is to facilitate the establishment of provincial geographical names committee. And the other is to ensure the standardization of geographical names. And above all, to facilitate the transformation process, where, given what Professor Christi has said, that we really need to restore names with a view to retrieving our heritage. So the issue of transformation, it's quite key with regards to that. And if you look at the composition of our council, it really consists of experts in place names, official languages, cultural policies. We have provincial reps constituting council. We also have representatives from the Surveyor General's Office. We also have members from South African Post Office and the PEN Sub Board. I think it's important, particularly with regards to names that are of have great difficulty. And the question that it's also of interest is that
just to let you know.
Then. Okay then. What does the S agency do? We establish with standardized geographical names. We recommend standardized names to the minister, and we are the member of United Nations group of experts on geographical names. While geographical names are covered by S agency, we cover towns, we cover suburbs, we cover human settlements, post office, and we also cover natural landforms in the form of hills, mountains, and rivers. There are names that do not fall under our ambit, and they are categorized into four. One, we have juristic names, which relate to country, province, and local authorities. We have features under the control of local authorities. We have private-owned buildings and other forms which we do not preside about. We also have cadastral names, which are not the responsibility of this council. Why PGNC are important? They are important because they assist the National Council in terms of gathering information to ensure that due diligence is done. What I need to emphasize is that PGNCs do not approve names, but they make recommendations, which are then submitted to SAGNC for
please wrap
further
please
scrutiny and okay then. Lastly, to say conducting names, it's important, and it's something that we really do. Though there are challenges with regards to that, and these challenges relate to questions that people pose on a regular basis with regards to how much does it cost to change names. And I think I'll come to that when in the question and answer session to give more clarity in terms of what that is all about. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Khensani. You've stuck very well to your time. I appreciate it, because we do want to invite as much participation in our Q&A session a little bit later today. Our next speaker is Mr. Christian Martin. Mr. Martin describes himself simply as a Khoisan activist, and he is one of the people who actually applied for the name changes that have been approved and, as Khensani pointed out to us, which are currently subject to an appeals process. But he is one of the people, one of the applicants in having these name changes made. So without much ado, let me hand over to Mr. Martin, and you also have 10 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Christi, and just want to say good morning to the panel. Prof, I really honestly, as the person that spoke before me, want to thank you for the background that you have actually given. I think that is what we actually have needed, especially from the institution that you are from. So I'm very grateful for that part. Prof, allow me to remind us what the preamble of the Constitution of the Republic of South Africa say, because it's important for what we are busy with. We must recognize the injustices of the past, honor those who suffered for justice and freedom in our land, respect those who have worked to build and develop our country. Then it also says, believe that South Africa belongs to all who live in it, united in our diversity. And for me, the important part is the part that says, united in our diversity. Then it goes further, Prof, to say that we must heal the divisions of the past. Now, that is an important part, the healing of divisions of the past, because it comes down and it speaks to why names should be changed. Prof, whilst 1.4 million people in the Nelson Mandela metro still discuss Gqeberha to be or not to be, thousands internationally have researched through BBC online who are Chief Dawid Stuurman, is what is the origin of Gqeberha, Kariega, and all those type of things. BBC actually, Prof, if you look at it, there are so many people that actually look at BBC and so forth. So for us, it's important just to realize that internationally, while we are forwarding and backwarding about a name, international people have already prepared themselves. I also just wanted to say, through a BBC interview and an article they wrote about Dawid Stuurman, Chief Dawid Stuurman, and also about the other names. In one of BBC's articles, within 3 days, Prof, 136,000 have viewed that. They say, in particular in Africa, is the 136,000, but more central to South Africa. And the beauty that they also said is that many of the African people have actually zoomed into this as to find out more about these name changes that they actually had. So for me, it is important again to reiterate, whilst we are busy this way and that way about the name change, international people have already, themselves when it comes to the name. I think tourism, if we talk later on about cost and all those type of things, it will actually lessen the cost when it comes to tourism. I just wanted also to say name changes, except for correcting the past, is also to remind ourselves that the South African history did not start in 1652. History did not start in 1652 nor in 1820. It didn't start when Jan van Riebeeck will celebrate soon, again, 6th of April, Jan van Riebeeck coming to South Africa, 1652. I just want to reiterate, history in South Africa did not start then, as well as let me put it this way, the Gqeberha history also did not start 1820, when the settlers put foot on our shore and was received by, as you have said, Prof, previously, by Sir Rufus Donkin, who was the acting governor of the time. The name change should not be about political expediency, nor to promote partisan politics, as recently the case were. For me, all these name changes from the mayor against or for was pure being partisan. New people just jumping up on board now, for me, it's just political expediency, Prof, as far as I'm concerned. Why I'm saying that? I asked the question to myself, Prof, where was this great energy during the actual process of name changes? Where was this energy? Where was this mobilizing of people against, for, or whatever the case might be? It was only the energy of the poor and the have-nots. Where was the energy of petitions against? Where was that energy? It was lazy people that depended on their resources, of having a computer in front of them whose pockets are deep enough to take us to court at the end of the day. And when I say to take us to the court, Prof, I mean the poor that went to the halls and have raised their feeling when it comes to name changes. So it was more a lazy exercise coming up with a petition and those type of things, Professor. The name change should rather be to build our identity, restore our history, to give sense of meaning and belonging to ourselves and more to our youth and the African child. That is what is important, Prof. I want to make an example of where I come from. I come from the northern areas of Port Elizabeth, Prof. Our people don't have any identity whatsoever. They will call themselves proud coloureds, not even knowing about the Population Registration Act of 1950, to why they started to be called a coloured person. Now, the importance for the African child, which include the descendants of the Khoi and San, whom are also coloured people. That is the importance that we are here busy with, identity. Because now, Prof, after the minister have officially declared the three names from the have-nots and from the poor people officially, I'm not even trying to suggest petitions and those type of things. I will reiterate, it was a lazy exercise. So for me, what happens is, Prof, just think of it this way. And this is my example, even in my area where I live, when people ask me this question. If a white child stands there, if an Indian child stands there, if an African child stands there, and a colored child, for the sake of the discussion, but I want to remind you, I'm a Khoi. So the point that I'm trying to make here is, then you ask the white child, who's your leader? Chances are he's going to say F.W. de Klerk. You ask the black child, who's your leader? Chances are he's going to say Nelson Mandela. You ask the Indian child, he might say Rahbanji. But the challenge I have with identity is when you ask that colored Khoi child who his or her leader that he looks up to, he will definitely give you one of our gang members' names within our area because there's nobody to identify with. But here comes a name called Chief Dawid Stuurman International Airport. We can identify with a hero, a legend like Chief Dawid Stuurman. You know, the beauty is, Prof, you can take the history of Chief Dawid Stuurman internationally. You read it to any person without saying a name. You don't raise Chief Dawid Stuurman's name when you put his CV in front of any person internationally. He will ask, is that also the history of Nelson Mandela? Because of the greatness of this individual. And then we have to answer, no, it is not the history also of Nelson Mandela. It is only the history of one of our great people in our country that was also on Robben Island as Nelson Mandela. So when it comes to that part, Prof, we need to make concerted efforts as to build our identity, to bring meaning back to the African child. And that's important to remind ourselves in the same spirit about Steve Biko when he tried during his lifetime through Black consciousness. Ma'am, this name changes will make sure that Steve Biko did not die in vain. Because if you look what Steve Biko have started in theory, the name changes are now in practice. It's practical. You can hear the name changes. You can hear our people. Yes?
You've got 1 minute.
People, it's enough for me, Prof. People will argue against name changes and anything else. But Prof, you must remember, there's two things in life that is certain. It is change and it is death. And the uncertain part of both, we don't know when it's going to happen. And both, Prof, is not a good experience for anybody. So this name change might not be a good experience for some, but it's a great experience for most.
Thank you so much, Mr. Martin. I am going to move over directly to our next speaker. We are very happy to have Professor Nokuzola Mndende. She holds a PhD in Religious Studies from the University of Cape Town. We are also happy to have her as an adjunct professor in the Department of Sociology and Anthropology here at Nelson Mandela University. She is the director of Itamagu Heritage Institute, and she's also a freelance presenter of African religion at Mkhulobwe radio station, and a commissioner at the Commission for the Promotion and Protection of the Rights of Cultural, Religious and Linguistic Communities. So let me immediately invite Professor Mndende to speak to us, and you also have 10 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you, Program Director and panelists, and all protocol observed. My topic is not focusing on the issues surrounding the recent name changes on Port Elizabeth and Tinaga. I'll just focus on the significance of a name, because some people are asking what's in a name. I will just focus on the purpose of naming in African culture. The purpose of naming, whether it is for individual or a place, it differs from community to community. Some people give names to individuals or places for various reasons, either for purposes of identification or for honoring someone whom they respect. Some give names for personal interests, and some for registration of a historical conquest over certain communities. And naming in African culture is very important. It's a very important component that determines the identity and the genealogy. There are various categories of names, and we know we have got personal names and we have got clan names. I won't mention the personal names as Umxhosa, because unfortunately the surnames, because a surname in isiXhosa is called Ifani, from Afrikaans van, V-A-N. Hence we have people with English, Dutch, or Afrikaans or Portuguese, or many surnames. So to us, the surname does not necessarily indicate your genealogy and your identity, but a clan name is very important, because it shows your sense of belonging and also shows your identity. The question of what's in a name may be taken very light by some cultures, but to an African, a name carries the social, ethical, historical, psychological, and spiritual dimensions of an individual. It reflects the parents' wishes and circumstances. And naming in some African cultures, they have got a special ritual called a naming ritual. This shows how important is a name to us. I won't mention everything, but I want to also indicate that some authors, they say the name provides messages to the members of the society at large about who an individual is. Second, they provide messages to the named individual about who or she is expected to be. So coming to the naming of the land in South Africa, it is common knowledge that in the past, it had become very easy for the African land to be named or renamed using the transplanted names from the colonial countries that conquered that particular area. Areas were either named after some generals, we all know that, or after some people who were nostalgic, like we are having someone who named London, that is in the east. Now we're having East London, Bethlehem, and many others. Sometimes the naming was done by a passerby. That is why I agree with Mr. Martin when he says history didn't start in 1652, because here we're also told that on Christmas Day, 1497, the ships of Vasco da Gama, sailing on their epoch-making journey from Portugal to India, sighted the land to which they gave the name of Natal in honor of the natal day of our Lord. So just a passerby was having refreshments. And then, oh, go today, it's the 25th day. So I called this place Natal. And then we carry on with that name. So when we say what, and there were people who were living in that area of the time. And what did the people call them that? So there are also many other names, Khensani, that are very insulting. For instance, I come from a group of people called the Amamfengu, the Fingos. But if you look at Butterworth, Somo, and Ngamakwe, that region is called the Fingoland region because the name Fingo was anglicized and Fengu was anglicized and called the Fingo. Now we've got the Fingoland region, we've got Fingoland Mall. But if you look at that name, it's so insulting that scholars define Fengu in many different ways, all humiliating, like to mention a few: an outcast, an imposed identity, a temporal label, an unfortunate name, a pseudo-ethnicity, a reproachful epithet. So all know, you know, but we're still having all those names. But now my question to the Geographical Names Council, now when we see now that there is that importance in the identity of the people who are named in a particular area, because we are not living on air, we are living in particular areas. That is why the part where you were born is very important. Hence, in isiXhosa, we say, when we ask where you were born, we say, Ipinkaba yako. Now, when we are having an Inkaba that is in East London, now that causes confusion. And now, this is because in the post-colonial and post-apartheid era, the restoration processes that we have so far, to me, they are half-cooked and are sometimes flavored with the deployment of China's Mandarinated recipes in South Africa. For instance, it's good to call some areas under the political parties, the people who have fought. I want to be controversial here. For instance, we have got a municipality called the Chief Albert Luthuli. Now, if we're talking about that, the Chief, again, is a colonial name. It was introduced by colonialism. Albert is a colonial name. The only African name is Luthuli. Now, if we're talking about the identity of that person who is called now Chief Albert Luthuli, which identity are we talking about? We've got O.R. Tambo. We've got Nelson Mandela. Nelson Mandela says himself was given the name on the first day at school. So we don't have a Holy Hlahla. Even that Holy Hlahla is spelled, is anglicized, is a Holy Hlahla, not Holy Hlahla. Even Tambo is anglicized, is Tambo and not Tambo. Now, when we are talking about restoring our identity, what do we mean? I'm interested in that. Some of the names were swapped because we've got Christi Baragwana, and yet Chris was Martin Tembisile, his identity. And the real Chris was his brother and not himself. So if now we're saying we are restoring the identity, what do we mean? And that is why I'm also saying, even now we are saying...
Mndende, sorry, just to say, you've got 2 minutes.
Okay, that is why now we are saying, how far back are we going with this restoration? And thank you, Prof. Now talking about, again, the names, I'm interested to look at, when I was in East London, there's a board called Chinatown, Beacon Bay, East London, and in Mandarin language. Now, when you are there, where are you? Chinatown, Beacon Bay, who's Beacon? East London is the London of the East. So what I'm trying to say to the geographical areas, the people council, there's still a long way to go. And I want to conclude by quoting Chinwezu, who says, our past by the task of implicit set to us is a compass to our future. That is a map of our past, is a pathfinder to our destiny. Thus, if we misread that map of our past or consult an incorrect map, we misdirect our efforts in shaping our future. I'm saying to end, Prof, we are still having a problem because we're having name change, but those identity names are still clothed in Dutch and colonial names, now also in the East and Far East. So what identity are we restoring? Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Professor Mndende. I'm going to move straight over to Mr. Kusta Jack, as he's fondly known, Mkhuseli Kusta Jack. His CV starts with born on the banks of the Gamtoos River. So I think he's very well rooted also, like Mr. Martin, to speak with us today. He grew up on the farms of Himansdorp at Oyster Bay, and he's a co-founder of youth congresses and the United Democratic Front during apartheid. Well, he was a student leader and also a leader of consumer boycotts. And then much more recently, he was the Eastern Cape convener of the Save South Africa campaign. He holds various directorships in companies and has also served on various bodies, including Business Against Crime, in the Demarcation Board, the St. Francis Hospice, Stats Council of South Africa, and so forth. So, Mr. Jack, let me hand over to you immediately, and you also have 10 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor.
Sorry, can I just ask that you tilt your computer screen down?
Like this?
That's much better. Oh, yeah. Almost. Okay. No. At the moment, your chin is being chopped off. So, if you
is that okay now?
I think that's good. No, it seems to be hopping back up. So
is that okay?
Keep it in place. No, you need to keep it at about that level.
Like this? Is it okay now?
A little bit down.
Down this way?
That's it. That's it. That would be perfect if you could keep it there.
That way?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
Start counting. Mandela, Professor Mndende and everybody. And thank you very much, Professor Christi, for handling this session. And thanks to the Herald for availing this platform to all of us. Well, first of all, when I have been naughty, I'm the first one to admit that. Let me accept that I'm one of those people that are said to have were sleeping, in the sense that I didn't participate during that process. And it happened, not that I'm saying it would have changed anything, but I'm just saying that I'm one person who is quick to admit that. Number two, I'm one person also who is very proud of our Constitution, and I do everything that I have to rely on the Constitution of the country for anything that I have, for my very existence. Because if people do not respect that Constitution, there will be no insurance for me. Now, I'm saying that because we are not doing just barging into this debate or whatever arguments about this thing without any particular basis or ground founded in the Constitution of the Republic of South Africa. As Mr. Khensani explained, the Constitution provides this opportunity that we are using now. So please, this is not to do with anything that people are trying to raise, which do not fall in the parameters of us objecting if we want to object, or supporting if we want to support any name or names that are coming forward. I thought that it's important that you said that. Well, I support personally name change, because in my reading of history books, and I can tell you that, and I should say this, I don't think there's any book written about the South African history, especially to deal with the dispossession, I have not come across. There is one governor, or it could have been one of the military men, of the empire. I think that was the one that they named Shepstone, who, writing a letter to Her Majesty or His Majesty's government, said that amongst the jobs that he was going to do as a matter of urgency was to change the names of, as he described us, their rivers, their mountains, and everything. So I have always been believing that there's a task to be done in order to rectify that fault. Now, that I'm not going to dwell further on that, except to say that I support name change. And precisely because, thanks to Christian Martin for giving us a preamble, I align myself totally, and I have no choice. I agree with that. That's the perfect spirit of what the Constitution wanted to do: reconciliation and building a post-apartheid South Africa that will heal us as a nation and keep us as one people. And that's what many of us were fighting for. I accept that names, as Professor Mndende totally and perfectly explained, because I always joke and say, amagama ethu awatsalwa mnqwasini. There's no lottery for names. That's how we grew up. It was a long process in the crawl that took days for men to come to the conclusion, well, what are we going to name this child? That's what she was doing there. Because in some names, you can detect from the name of a person the structure of that particular family or the society come from or whatever the conditions at the time. So that is very critical. So the name is also rooted, always rooted in those kinds of things. I do not consider poor pronunciation of name as an issue. I have traveled around the world. There are best places that I've been, whether it was in Vietnam, Mexico, Brazil, or anywhere. I cannot pronounce them. I have to write them. That's not an issue. I support broad and sufficient consultation, as is the spirit mentioned in the Constitution for that purpose, and as was read by our friend, Mr. Khensani. Obviously, why do I oppose? First of all, I'm opposed to Gqeberha for us changing the name to Gqeberha, and I see no reason why Uitenhage must be called Kariega either. Because after all, in the case of Uitenhage, if you like, there is a name that Uitenhage is known with, and Gqeberha is a name that was in for the little that is associated basically with Woma Township over the years, and that's where it has been, and that's how it is known. Gqeberha is associated with that. Now that's fine. If there was a strong justification to use Gqeberha, I am happy to accept that. I have no problem with that. Why I have a problem with the process is because to start with, to have 300 people deciding on this, and I must say, with due respect, Mr. Comrade Martin, there are not only 300 people who are poor in the metro. This metro got 1.2 to 1.4 million people. And I can tell you, if you give statistics of poverty, you can easily say 90% of those people fall in the category of what we call poor people. So that will mean that close to 1 million people didn't participate to the 300 that party. Surely that means that there is something wrong there. There were 8 sittings. I wonder in some areas how many people were in that hall. Maybe 2, maybe 3. So I am of the view that going straight away after I pointed out these issues without wasting time, I'm going to say this. I believe that an appropriate name that will work for us here, we don't have to be extra, what do they call it, melodramatic about things. Want to do something out of the ordinary for the sake of it. It's not necessary for that. When actually we got something easier to do, we have to do that. For example, Nelson Mandela Bay or Nelson Mandela City is a name that was canvassed, opposed by others, and ultimately, through the process that was used, got accepted. And for me, where I come from, I see no reason whatsoever. There is no basis for not using that because that's already an iconic name internationally. I am happy that the speaker has pointed out tourism international because other people just say, we don't care about that. We just want change for the sake of change. No, if you consider those things, Kenneth, then it doesn't make sense for you to go and start something simply because you want something extremely, that is a stream name to raise your point. You raise your point when you tell us everything to do. Now I'm saying Nelson Mandela is an icon. Nelson Mandela got values. Nelson Mandela has integrity.
Mr.
Nelson
Jack,
Mandela is a name.
Wrap up for us. Sorry, Mr. Jack, if you could wrap up, please.
I am. Nelson Mandela is a Ho Chi Minh. Go to Vietnam, Ho Chi Minh City, which used to be Saigon. You can feel Ho Chi Minh as you walk amongst the people there, as you see the building, as you see everything, because they wanted to keep that memory as a monument for generations to come, for visitors to that country. And that is why we travel to these places. There are other places where you have New York City, that is in New York State. You got Washington, D.C. in the Washington state. So there are many, many examples where you can use this thing and you just don't invent something where you don't have any reason to do so. Okay, in terms of the world liking this, of course, the people will accept what we give them. I'm not saying that people cannot tell us what name to have. We can decide the name we want. And I'm saying that I am prepared to persuade people to that name, and I am prepared to be persuaded and accept if the majority of people are persuaded to take Gqeberha and Kariega, we go with that. But I think that the basis of using Nelson Mandela City, Nelson Mandela Bay, or whatever you choose, the two to me, you can use, I don't mind. That's where I stand.
Right, thank you so much, Mr. Jack, for that. And to all our speakers, we've had a lively engagement, I see, on our chat online. Just to say that, just to point out that this is not a debate, in fact, this is a dialogue. So we will all have different positions, which we are welcome to air. Ad hominem attacks are obviously not acceptable. So do try and refrain from that. And
come again, sorry?
Ad hominem attacks, so attacks on the person, personal attacks. Please, I'm not talking to you, Mr. Jack, I'm speaking to our audience, well, including you, but I'm speaking to our audience. So I'm referring to the questions in the chat, that's what I'm talking to at the moment. The name of our speakers, please note them. Mr. Dawid Stuurman is actually a historical figure. So if we can just avoid any kind of confusion around that. Then just to move to the questions themselves then, there are quite a few procedural questions. I think Mr. Maluleke has pointed out that given that the name changes are in the appeal process now, he would not be in a position to speak to that appeal process. So we're not going to entertain any of those questions, but they are there for people to see. So if you want to inform yourself about the problems that people have with the procedure followed in changing the names, you can see those questions and comments in the chat function. Then the financial question obviously comes up a lot. We do know that Nelson Mandela Bay is under incredible strain as a metro. We know that we've got a vast, in-depth problem with corruption. We know that infrastructure is crumbling and so forth. So it would seem from a lot of people's point of view, even people who support the name change, feel that, how isn't the timing just not, does the timing make sense in this particular moment, given the pressure on the national budget, given the pressure on the provincial and the metro budget, and given the state of the city, which has, as we know, has fallen into disrepair over the past how many years. So that's one question that I would like our speakers to address. The other question, so the question of affordability. How do we balance this important quest of having our people represented in the names around us? How do we balance that quest with the question of affordability, with budget constraints, with a city that's under incredible pressure? Then let me just see what else jumps out. There's also another comment. Somebody is talking about how the history of Port Elizabeth before Port Elizabeth is not really spoken about. And that would be nice for me if people also, our speakers, elaborated on that. How do you understand that history, the point that our speakers were making, that history didn't start in 1652, of course. The history of this place where we are, next to what's been called Algoa Bay, that history didn't start in 1820 when the British settlers set foot here. So there's a history prior to that. How do name changes help us in retrieving that history, that prior history? And then I also want to share with us quickly a comment from our former National Director of Public Prosecutions, which I see has also joined us, Advocate Mkhuseli. He's saying that the decolonization of the mind takes longer than the struggle for national liberation. So that is what is at stake here, is the question of the decolonization of the mind. He says, I support the name change as long as it restores the dignity of the previous oppressed majority. The process has to be fair and procedural so as to have legitimacy. Dawid Stuurman has to be honored as a hero of our struggle for national liberation. So let's just kick off with those few comments and questions, and we'll take it from there. So can we start with Mr. Martin? And can I ask everybody to not take longer than 2 minutes? I know it's a squeeze, but unfortunately our time is running out. Mr. Martin?
Yeah, thank you, Christi, again. I think for time's sake, let me just start with the one when it comes to history before 1652 and 1820. You see, when it comes to our South African democracy and what we want to achieve in this country through transformation, I would want to say on that one, all of us have a responsibility. This is not the responsibility only of the geographical name changes, organization, political parties, and so forth. This is where I want to throw it to you, Professor Christi, and say that tertiary institutions have that responsibility to go and do the relevant necessary research and then put it in our curriculums so that our children and even ourselves, because I won't sit here and say that I know everything about the history before a certain time and age. I won't monopolize history. So for me, that one I will put right in front of the door of tertiary institutions. And the Eastern Cape are blessed with about, if not more than 5 of these institutions. So they can do a very good job on that one. On the second one, when it comes to cost, Christi, that is not a new phenomenon when it comes to the South African history and politics. You must remember, even 1994, 27th of April, before that, there was an urgency when it comes to freedom and all these type of things. Remember, there was a debt, international debt against South Africa. Nobody then said that, no, because of the huge debt that we have internationally, that the former government have borrowed money from wherever, let's stop and first wait and see how we can equal this debt. So money will always be a challenge wherever you go. So for me, only, and this is my point on cost, only if any person can give me the cost of the life of George Gqeberha, of the life of Steve Biko, of the lives of the Khoi and San people were brutally killed in this country, of our the crown of the Queen of Britain, the big diamond in that crown that was divided in 6 pieces. If any person can give me the cost of that, then you can come to me and talk to me about cost of a name, the cost of my identity, the cost of my being, and my dignity can never be equated to any amount, though it is important. There's no better day than today to change that name.
Thank you so much. Shall we move to Mr. Maluleke? Mr. Maluleke?
Thank you, Prof. I really cannot agree more with Christian Martin in terms of cost, but I also need to indicate that insofar as implementing the Act is concerned, yes, they are constrained given the fact that our PGNCs, that is your Provincial Geographical Names Committee, do not have sufficient budget to implement the mandate. You will agree with me that there are quite a number of names that have been gazetted, but due to lack of resources, they have not been changed on the landscape. And I think that it's a cost issue. And also to share with the South African public that if you look at the budgets allocated to these PGNCs, really they are shameful in the sense that there's one province I'm not going to mention where their total budget per annum is less than 100,000 to implement this mandate. So you can see how difficult it is to implement these processes. And the other limitation that I also need to bring to the fore is that our act goes up to the gazetting process. Insofar as implementing is concerned, nothing is being said, but we are in the process of foundation with a view to looking at how best can we have an integrated process that would look at how this can be implemented. For example, if we were to implement at local government level, it will be important to integrate this process in the IDPs so that municipalities are aware of these programs and resources can be allocated to that effect. So insofar as budgets are concerned, at national level, there isn't much, to be honest. I think our budget is not greater than 5 million to really implement this national mandate. It's really a cause for concern, but measures are being done to address that. There are policies that we're trying to put in place to really address that. There's one question on the chart that has been raised with regards to consultation. Yes, we have concluded the process on the development of a consultation policy, and that policy is informed.
Mr. Maluleke, please wrap up for us.
We had with regards to, yes, the setback we had with regard to Makado and Makanda, and based on that experience, that policy will take that into cognizance. Lastly, the consultation process takes into consideration the promotion of Administrative Justice Act, which does make provision for consultation. So those are some of the tenets that allow us to guide the consultative process. Thank you, Prof.
Thank you so much. Professor Mndende, would you come in for us, please?
Thank you so much, Prof. In responding to these 3 questions, we cannot stop our processes because of corruption, because that means we will never do anything because corruption will never end. And it's like, if now we allow that, it's like having a forest with the indigenous trees without any roots. but the imported trees, they are being irrigated. So we must not allow that. If now we want to retrieve our own identity, let us do it in whatever way. Coming to the history of Port Elizabeth, again, we find ourselves in the problem of the colonial boundaries, because it is that guy who called this place Port Elizabeth within a broader traditional community. So again, we must also look at that. We must not be based on colonialism. Now let us come to, I agree with Mr. Advocate Vosipikoli that decolonization takes long. But on the way, we agree it takes long, but we must make sure that on our way to that long way, we unpack the suffocating layers that we are having, not go there with those suffocating layers. And we must also be able to be allowed to speak the truth, because what we find these days, we find that when we talk about the Khoi and the San, people think that to be a Khoi and to be a San means the African speaking. And yet, history tells us that Amakikwa, Osukwini, Ondebe, Okopoi are all the Khoi descendants. Why, when we talk about the Khoi and the San, we look at them from a linguistic perspective? Why can't we look at the history of the people above the languages? Because we can't say because the coloureds are called coloureds and not the Khoi. For instance, I'm a descendant of Ujola, who was a Khoi woman. But you find that you are not even part of those debates. So I think even the Khoi and the San, they must be inclusive in their discussions of the history of the Khoi and the San. There are those who are absorbed by Amaxhosa. I'm talking about Eastern Cape now. And there are those who are absorbed by the Afrikaners. But if we're talking about restoring our identity, let us look at both groups, not at one group. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was that packed the punch. Thank you. And then let's move over to Mr. Jack. Just please unmute yourself, Mr. Jack.
Can you hear me now?
Yes,
Yeah.
that's perfect.
Yeah. Yes. Now look, on the point of cost, cost will always be there, and cost will have to be. No one who can say cost must be just disregarded. You can't do that. However, I think that if the process of changing names is done on consensus and agreed on, it shouldn't be delayed by money, because people can just go ahead and do and call themselves and call the thing the same way without incurring any further cost. Of course, the cost can just go as be sorted out as we go. Yeah, I think that's all I could say about the cost. Yeah, about the history of this place, I wanted just to say something. There was one chief before the Napoleonic Wars, and that is going before the British came here. If you see the place they call Fort Frederick today, I bought that building because it was the port captain of the British who used it, who was enjoying a similar status really as any, like a magistrate and so on. He built that for himself there, and it's such a thing. I wish this organization could purchase that. That is where one of the Xhosa chiefs who stayed there was, who I know was located there, and he stayed there and fought from that place until he was pushed away as the British were moving in and pushing us on trying to drive us to the other side of the Khoi or the Official River. So, which was the job that was in any event, what's his name, Uitenhage, that he came for. on top of establishing another magisterial court in Uitenhage. That was the primary function, to be here so that they could minimize the existence and the ability of the Xhosas to move back to their place here and the Khoi people. So that's what I know about what happened before the colonial disposition.
Thank you so much. Mr. Drack, let me start again with you. And there is a question that's raised by someone who basically says that the name change will constitute a breach of the compromise that was entered into in 1994, according to which it was agreed that municipalities will be given new names, while the names of towns and cities are retained as is. Therefore, the metro is called the Nelson Mandela Bay Metro, and the name of the city remains Port Elizabeth, as recognition and equal representation of our history and diversity. So, Mr. Jack, just your response to that, and Mr. Maluleke, if you also feel free to respond to that. But let's start with Mr. Jack.
Now, I have no knowledge of such an agreement, and I don't think actually it does exist. Number two, the reason why Nelson Mandela Metro was based on the concept of metros, where you club together different municipalities or cities with the aim of economies of scale. That's what they were doing. And that grouping, as they will operate under one name as one entity, they call it Nelson Mandela Bay, meaning that it was going to affect it was going to act on behalf of the others. I don't think it had anything to do with changing the names. And even now, I don't think that's what is envisaged by this. However, what we are saying, if you notice that I keep on saying Nelson Mandela Bay or Nelson Mandela City, that is because, you see, if you want to make it easy to use it for the whole group now, instead of being a city, because city becomes Port Elizabeth. But once you say Bay, in my opinion, then you include Uitenhage and Dispatch, all right? However, that I'm not saying that in the event that people push that no, Uitenhage should be Gqeberha as its known name, historically, at least I know that Xhosa writers, you will find that name in their writings, but you will never find Gqeberha in any of the writings by any Xhosa writer of those that I've read. Most of the books that I think I have read, most of them, you won't find the word Gqeberha, but you will find the name for, I'm talking about Xhosa writers and poets and all that. Gqeberha, you will find there, but you will struggle. You may, somebody can show me, I'll be very happy, I'll read about it.
Great, thanks a lot. Mr. Maluleke, are you aware of any such agreement around retaining the names of city centres?
Prof, I really have no knowledge of that agreement. I will welcome to get a copy, given the fact that we are in the process of reviewing some of our policies and reviewing the legislation. So maybe SAJ can find expression in that process when we consult. But to answer your question, I have no knowledge of the agreement. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Let's talk about the names themselves, Gqeberha as well as Kariega. I think Dawid Stuurman is very clear. The case for Dawid Stuurman is a very clear case. But the question has been raised also by Mr. Jack now around Gqeberha. Where does it come from? Why specifically that? As I said in my intro, I've heard that it's been the historical name of the Barkens River, and of course we know it's the name of the Walmer Township. And I indicated the kind of symbolic value that's involved in actually naming, the city after the township that was subjected to so much harassment and efforts at exclusion over many, many decades. But Mr. Martin, do you want to come in and just tell us a bit more about Gqeberha and about Kariega? And Professor Mndende, if you are also comfortable to speak about that. But let's go first to Mr. Martin. Mr. Martin, just unmute.
Yeah, I think from my side, let me say the following. when it comes to the word Gqeberha, Patti the Mayor is not here, that we should understand that it's a Xhosa name. So that one settled, that is a Xhosa name that evolved over time. You see the beauty of what we are trying to achieve now. Our ancestors already achieved when they stayed together through social coercion, through intermarriage and all those type of things. They've already achieved that, but we are trying now through law. So therefore, the word Gqeberha, it's actually a Xhosa word. Now, it's a strange phenomenon when people try to say is that, no, this one is not Xhosa and that one is not Xhosa. Frankly speaking, if you take isiXhosa in itself, 15% of isiXhosa is Khoi and son names. You take the cliques of isiXhosa, then most of the cliques in isiXhosa is actually Khoi, deriving from Khoi names. So, and then you can go on and on and on. So long and short is through people staying, living together, sharing cultures, sharing even religion, because Gusta Jack would assist me with this one, the reference to God in isiXhosa is Tiko. And that in itself, it shows that what we want to achieve now has been achieved long ago. Then just coming to the books, I believe, and I've seen and read somewhere, Gusta, that Reverend Chio Soga, he was, you know, his descendancy and all these type of things, the mixed blood and all those type of things of the Reverend himself. So if you look at him coming from Scotland, went to study there, being a Mfundisi, coming back, the history books is saying that in one of them, he says that he preached on the banks of Gqeberha. So I would say that is what I have read, and what you have read was written by somebody. What I have read is written by somebody, so I won't claim you right, I'm wrong. All these things was written on our behalf, so we just read it and as to share information for that matter. So yeah, as far as I know, that is the one on Gqeberha. Now the beauty, Prof, if you can maybe just give me this. Sorry, really for that, Prof. Sorry for that. But I was just trying to grab, I was really trying to do extensive, what's his name, on the word Gqeberha, you know?
Yeah, that's good. But I'm just wondering, maybe to speak briefly to Kariega. Somebody in the chat says that it refers to a type of buck that you don't find in this area. What is the meaning of Kariega? I'm assuming it is a Khoi word originally.
Yeah, it's a Khoi word, and what I have found out about the word, remember there's references to words that you give. If this buck comes up in Kariega, it can be called the Kariega buck and so forth. So I don't have any question or dispute about the buck because many animals. Me, Prof, when it comes to the name Kariega, it's actually a place of reeds, you know. So yeah, that on my behalf I can say about, but I don't question the other person's interpretation. I would have okay.
I think that's good. Thanks a lot. Let us give some time to Professor Mndende. I think, in fact, let's Professor Mndende, you were talking earlier about the power of a name in Xhosa understandings, the Xhosa worldview, and you were particularly saying that for a human being, for an individual, a name captures social, ethical, historical, spiritual dimensions of that person's being in the world. So, because we've got a recurring question on the chat that raises the question of human behavior. Will human behavior be changed? That is not what we're really talking about here. We're talking about the affirmation and the confirmation of people's identities in the place where they are. Can you speak to the power of that?
Thank you, Prof. Before I can do that, I'll quickly comment on what Mr. Jack was saying on Kariega. Even myself, I was shocked by Kariega. I thought that is going to be called Kariega because many authors speak of that area as Kariega. And coming again to what Mr. Martin was saying about the cliques from the Khoi, and that is why sometimes I suggest that before we can say these things, we must look at the effects of those names on the people being named. For instance, he's talking about the name of God, which is called the topical. Fortunately, I'm also a theologian. That is a name that was imposed by Van der Kemp because he married a Khoi woman. And then in Khoi, they've got this Tiku Owa, and which was translated into Tiko. So this is not anything we can boast about because it's an imposed name again from missionary Van der Kemp. Otherwise, Amaxhosa were calling God Kamata. So that Kamata was being displaced by this newly formed a name, which is not theirs. Coming to the power of a name, you know, when what you call now a Kusta, because it's just a nickname, Mkhuseli. So that means the parents were having that vision of this son will protect us, so will khusela us. So Nwabo, that means he will bring joy to us. So names have got a meaning and the interest of the people that they are naming. That is why we must consider the person who is naming and the person who is named, and also the environment where the person is. So that is why, to me, I'm saying to have Nelson. Who is Nelson? It may be somebody from London. But if we talk about Kholihlahla, his parents were having some vision that, hey, this man will holler the hlahlas, the branches, and will do this and that and that. But that vision now has faded away. Is Nelson, which in the near future, it may stop being Nelson Mandela. It will be Nelson Mandela, whom we will not even know what that person is. So the power of word is very important. That is why, Prof, most of us are having problems of two names because our names were called the hidden names, and then we were given other names which were called the school names or English names and so on, which names that were distorting our identities. That is why it is good to say what is in a name, because a name that doesn't define who am I should get rid of it.
That sounds like the perfect note to end on, in fact, that if a name doesn't define us, we should get rid of it. So I want to hand over at this stage to Rochelle de Kok. And just from my side, briefly to say thank you to our speakers, and also thank you to our audience for being here with us today. Myself, I've really enjoyed this conversation. Rochelle de Kok is the editor of the Herald and Weekend Post. She has spent the last 13 years in various roles in the news industry, 10 of which she spent focusing extensively on the political coverage of the newspaper's platform. So without further ado, Rochelle, over to you.
Good afternoon, and thank you very much, Prof. Christi. I think Professor Mndende really just summed it up perfectly when she spoke about what is in a name. And I think we've tried to extensively, well, the speakers have tried extensively to explain, you know, the importance of a name and why everyone has their different viewpoints. And I think that's the ultimate goal of, you know, the dialogue that we've hosted here today as the Herald and Nelson Mandela University. Is it about restoring dignity? Is it about restoring identity? Is it about restoring identity to ensure that one has your dignity restored? Those are the kind of questions I think that we are left with here today. You know, Mr. Christian Martin, a well-known activist here in our city, you know, speaking about, you know, having representation really and recognition, and who does the colored and Khoi child look up to? You know, those are the discussions that we should be having. Gqeberha, Nelson Mandela Bay, Nelson Mandela City, what are the names that the majority of the people in the city that we live in, what do they say? And should more people have a say to have those names overturned? Those are the important discussions that I think we should continue to have, and we believe that it's through dialogue such as this that we can maybe spark a movement. A spark a movement that we hope will begin to facilitate change, a positive change that is. I'd like to thank each and every one of our panelists for participating in this important discussion today. I'd like to thank you, Christi, for facilitating it for us on behalf of the Herald and Nelson Mandela University's CANRAD department. I'd like to say thank you to everybody who's tuned in and also participated by sending in your questions and comments. We trust that you'd have an awesome afternoon, and join us the next time we have such important community dialogues. Thank you.